For centuries, humanity was seen as weak and insignificant, ignored by the galaxy, dismissed by those in power, filed away as a cautionary example of a species that reached too far, too fast, and paid the price for it. In the vast archives of the Galactic Council, humanity occupied a thin record. No grand wars, no legendary technologies, no ancient wisdom passed down through millennia. Just a short list of conflicts, environmental mismanagement, and a troubling tendency to argue with itself even while facing extinction. To the Council, humanity was noisy, inefficient, and fragile. Useful once, briefly, as labor, as traders, as expendable allies in border skirmishes that mattered little in the long arc of galactic history. But when humanity's expansion stalled, when their colonies withdrew from shared space and their signals faded from common channels, the galaxy barely noticed. Species disappear all the time. Some collapse under their own weight. Some are erased by stronger neighbors. Some simply fail to adapt. The Council assumed humanity had followed the pattern. They told themselves humans lacked unity, that they were too emotional, too divided, too dependent on external trade and borrowed technology. A species like that couldn't survive prolonged pressure, let alone isolation. So when humanity vanished beyond the monitored lanes, the Council closed the file. Finished. Resolved. Not worth the resources to confirm. And for a long time, that assumption went unchallenged. Trade routes flourished without human merchants. Council fleets expanded into former human-adjacent space. New client species were elevated, praised for their stability and obedience. Humanity became a historical footnote, occasionally referenced in academic debates as an example of unrealized potential. If only they had listened. If only they had accepted guidance. If only they had known their place. No one wondered what happened to the billions who had lived on those worlds. No one tracked the faint, anomalous energy readings at the fringe of sensor range. No one questioned why unmapped regions stayed unervingly quiet. Because quiet, to the galaxy, meant empty. They were wrong. Humanity was not gone. They were learning. While the galaxy measured strength in fleets and territory, humans measured it in endurance. While the Council perfected control through law and hierarchy, humanity focused on something far less elegant and far more dangerous. Survival without permission. They learned how to exist without trade. How to function without approval. How to build systems that did not collapse when cut off from the wider galaxy. And most importantly, they learned what the Council never did. That weakness is not the same as fragility. A fragile thing shatters once and is gone forever. A weak thing adapts, or dies trying. So when the first long-range sensor arrays began reporting impossible readings, massive objects moving where no lanes existed, energy signatures that did not match any known drive, the Council dismissed them as errors. When listening posts went silent at the edges of mapped space, explanations were filed and forgotten. And when a single transmission finally cut through every channel at once, clear, calm, unmistakably human, the Council realized, far too late, just how dangerous their mistake had been. Because humanity was not finished. They were only done waiting. The Galactic Council tightened its grip. Not with fleets or declarations of war, but with paperwork, policy, and procedure, the weapons it trusted most. Humanity was reclassified under a new security framework, one written in careful language that sounded protective while accomplishing something far more decisive. Trade was cut. Human shipping licenses were suspended, pending review. Contracts were frozen. Essential materials, quantum substrates, medical compounds, navigation cores, were quietly added to restricted lists. Dockyards that had once welcomed human vessels now delayed them indefinitely, until captains were forced to turn back or run out of supplies. Rights were revoked. Human representatives lost voting privileges. Then speaking privileges. Then access to the chambers altogether. Council law, selectively enforced, was suddenly remembered and applied with enthusiasm. Travel limitations were imposed. Surveillance mandates approved. Entire human populations were designated as non-compliant risk groups. All of it was legal. All of it was justified. All of it was devastating. Humanity protested through proper channels. They filed appeals, cited treaties, invoked mutual defense clauses signed in better times. They reminded the Council of shared wars fought side by side, of worlds rebuilt together, of promises made under open stars. The Council acknowledged the filings, then ignored them. Sanctions followed, tightening like a slow vice. Insurance guilds raised transit costs until civilian travel became impossible. Navigation beacons along human routes went dark. Communications lagged, then failed, as maintenance contracts were abruptly cancelled. Humanity was pushed into isolation. And the Council watched closely. They had seen this pattern countless times. A species cut off from interstellar trade would fracture. Economies would fail. Colonies would turn on each other. Within a few cycles, desperation would do the rest. The Council expected collapse. Instead, they saw something unsettling. Human space did not erupt into chaos. There were no mass refugee waves, no frantic distress calls flooding Council channels. Traffic diminished, then vanished, but not in panic. In coordination. Human convoys rerouted inward. Civilian traffic consolidated. Outer colonies that were once considered marginal suddenly became hubs of activity. The few probes the Council dared to send back reported massive industrial movement, shipyards expanding instead of shrinking, energy output increasing instead of failing. Analysts flagged the data as anomalous. Supervisors dismissed it as misinterpretation. After all, a species without access to the wider galaxy could not grow. The Council assumed humanity was burning through its remaining resources in a final, desperate attempt to survive. They predicted riots, power failures, political fragmentation. None of it came. Instead, human systems went quiet. Too quiet. No broadcasts. No pleas. No demands. The Council took this as confirmation. Finished, they told themselves. Isolated, divided, and slowly collapsing beyond the edge of relevance. Another example to justify the Council's methods, another cautionary tale to present to younger species about the dangers of non-compliance. They closed monitoring files, reassigned observers, moved on to more pressing matters. They never asked the most important question. What happens when a species stops asking for help and starts preparing to survive without anyone else at all? Because far from collapsing, humanity was shedding dependence. Every sanction removed a weakness. Every revoked right burned away illusion. Every closed door forced them to build their own. The Council believed isolation was a death sentence. For humanity, it was the beginning of something far more dangerous. Isolation didn't break humanity. It unified them. At first, the change wasn't dramatic. There were no speeches broadcast across the stars, no flags lowered or raised in symbolic unity. Humanity didn't declare itself whole. It simply stopped being divided. For generations, humans had carried old arguments into space, nations reborn as colonies, corporate interests masquerading as governance, ideological lines drawn across planets that had never known Earth. Those divisions survived because the galaxy allowed them to. Trade softened conflict. Council oversight dampened consequences. Isolation stripped all of that away. When Council trade vanished, it didn't matter which banner a colony flew. Supply shortages didn't care about politics. When navigation lanes closed, distance stopped being an abstract concept and became a threat. When Council patrols failed to respond to human distress calls, denial gave way to clarity. No one else was responsible for humanity's survival. That realization spread faster than any decree. Emergency councils formed across human space, not led by politicians but by people who understood systems, logisticians, engineers, medics, fleet coordinators. Meetings weren't about power or blame. They were about one question. How do we make sure everyone lives? Old divisions vanished. Corporations discovered profit meant nothing without continuity. Many dissolved voluntarily, folding their assets into shared resource pools. Others resisted, and were quietly outcompeted by cooperative networks that moved faster, built smarter, and wasted nothing. Military forces that once answered to different governments began operating together out of necessity. Shared patrols became joint commands. Joint commands became permanent structures. Uniforms lost their national insignia, replaced with functional designations. Culture remained diverse. Survival became collective. All colonies stood under one command. It wasn't an empire. There was no throne, no capital world crowned above the rest. Command emerged organically, a coordination layer rather than a ruling body. Its authority didn't come from law or tradition, but from results. When command issued a directive, it worked. Supply chains stabilized. Power grids synchronized. Manufacturing standards unified. A ship built in one system could be repaired in another without modification. Medical protocols standardized across worlds, dramatically reducing mortality during crises. For the first time, humanity functioned like a single organism. And organisms adapt quickly. Education changed. Children learned systems thinking before history. Emergency response before politics. Everyone was taught how to keep something running, how to fix something broken, how to function when nothing external could be trusted. Humanity didn't militarize its population. It prepared them. Because if no one else would protect them, they would protect themselves. Defense networks replaced borders. Early warning arrays stretched far beyond mapped space, watching vectors no council doctrine had ever considered threats. Humanity planned not for likely dangers, but for unknown ones. They assumed betrayal. They assumed isolation. They assumed worst-case scenarios, and built for them. The galaxy never saw these changes. Council observers had been reassigned. Sensor coverage reduced. Reports that hinted at unusual coordination were buried under bureaucracy or dismissed as statistical noise. Humanity became invisible by accident. And humanity didn't correct the mistake. They had learned something essential during isolation. Being underestimated is an advantage. So while the Council congratulated itself on another resolved problem, humanity continued to integrate. Colonies once separated by light years functioned as neighbors. Decisions that once took decades were made in days. Not through tyranny. Through necessity. Isolation had done what centuries of diplomacy and conflict never could. It removed the illusion of safety provided by others. In its place, humanity built something quieter. Stronger. Unified not by ideology, but by shared responsibility. And when the galaxy eventually looked back toward human space, it would find not a fractured species begging for readmission, but a single, prepared civilization that no longer needed anyone's permission to exist. In silence, humanity evolved. Cut off from the noise of the wider galaxy, human space grew still, but never stagnant. Without external markets to impress or rivals to intimidate, progress shed its theatrics. Innovation became quiet, relentless, and focused on one unforgiving goal: survival. New engines came first. Human engineers abandoned the galactic obsession with shortcuts through reality. Hyperspace corridors, slipstream tunnels, folded dimensions, all were fast, elegant, and fragile. Humanity chose something else entirely. Endurance drives. Engines built to push directly against the structure of space, converting time and mass into sustained acceleration. They were inefficient by Council standards, brutally so, but they never failed. Human ships no longer relied on navigational lanes or external infrastructure. They could travel anywhere reality allowed them to exist. They didn't arrive suddenly. They arrived unstoppably. Unbreakable shields followed. Not single-layer energy bubbles designed for showpiece battles, but dense, interlocked systems, fields nested within fields, reinforced by physical mass and adaptive algorithms. Human shields didn't try to negate damage. They absorbed it, redirected it, learned from it. Every impact made them stronger. Hull plating thickened until ships resembled moving fortresses. Armor was grown, layered, replaced, and grown again. Critical systems were buried beneath ecosystems, farms, reservoirs, fabrication bays, so that even catastrophic damage became survivable. Human vessels were no longer vehicles. They were habitats. Fleets were built, but not for conquest. There were no banners, no heroic naming conventions, no victory markings. Ships were identified by role and redundancy. Ark-class carriers safeguarded populations. Foundry fleets manufactured replacements mid-transit. Defense lattices operated as mobile terrain rather than aggressive formations. Every loss was anticipated. Every function replaceable. Every ship expendable, except the people inside. Weapons existed, but they were tools, not statements. Area denial arrays. Interdiction fields. Precision null systems meant to remove threats with minimal collateral damage. Humanity designed war not to win glory, but to end danger. While the galaxy looked away, humanity prepared. Artificial intelligence, once restricted, once feared, was rebuilt from the ground up. Not as commanders, not as gods, but as collaborators. Every AI system was paired with human oversight, trained to assume error rather than perfection, failure rather than success. Biology advanced alongside steel. Human physiology adapted quietly. Radiation tolerance increased. Cellular repair accelerated. Immune systems became aggressive, self-updating networks. Humans did not become visibly different. They became durable. Generations grew up inside this preparation. Children learned fabrication and repair alongside reading and mathematics. Survival literacy became universal. Knowing how to keep systems running was as basic as language. Beyond human space, the galaxy remained unaware. The Council was busy managing crises, suppressing dissent, and reassuring itself that humanity had faded into irrelevance. Sensor data that contradicted this belief was filtered, reinterpreted, or ignored entirely. It was comfortable not to look. And so the galaxy never saw the fleets forming beyond known maps. Never saw the engines that could cross distances without permission. Never saw the shields that endured forces capable of cracking moons. Never saw a civilization that had stopped chasing approval and started building permanence. By the time the silence became noticeable, humanity was no longer preparing to rejoin the galaxy. They were preparing to outlast it. Then a new enemy appeared. It did not arrive with ceremony or warning. There were no diplomatic probes, no declarations of intent. One moment the outer systems were quiet, the next they were screaming, and then they were gone. The first world fell in less than a cycle. Long-range sensors detected massive distortions beyond mapped space, followed by fleets that ignored established lanes and navigational physics entirely. The enemy ships were vast and asymmetrical, grown rather than built, their hulls alive with shifting structures that adapted even as they were being observed. They called themselves the Dominion. Worlds fell. Council defense fleets mobilized too late, arriving only to find debris fields where cities and stations had once existed. Orbital platforms were dismantled and fed into colossal processing constructs. Moons were cracked open for resources. Atmospheres burned as a byproduct of efficiency, not malice. The Dominion did not wage war. They harvested. Species were enslaved. Survivors were catalogued with mechanical indifference. Those with technical knowledge were implanted with neural control nodes and forced to maintain Dominion warforms. Soldiers were chemically altered, stripped of identity, and driven back into battle as disposable shock units. Entire populations were reduced to labor inputs in a vast, expanding machine. Those deemed unnecessary were erased. Refugees fled into council space carrying stories no one wanted to believe, of neural chains, forced assimilation, and worlds converted into processing hubs. Some spoke of entire cultures reduced to biological material, their histories ending not with destruction, but with repurposing. The galaxy panicked. The Galactic Council convened emergency sessions that stretched on for cycles. Representatives shouted over one another, demanding action while assigning blame. Ancient species argued over jurisdiction. Younger ones begged for protection. Military blocs refused to commit fleets without guarantees of reimbursement and command authority. The Council argued while systems burned. Votes were proposed. Votes were delayed. Votes were vetoed. Coalitions formed on paper and collapsed in practice. Fleets mobilized too slowly, bound by protocols designed for controlled conflict, not extinction. Every decision required consensus, and consensus arrived too late to matter. When Council fleets finally engaged the Dominion in force, the results were catastrophic. Entire armadas vanished. Flagships were torn apart mid-transmission. The Dominion sacrificed ships freely, learning from every exchange, adapting faster than Council tacticians could respond. Weapons that had once decided wars barely slowed them. Within a few short cycles, the The truth became undeniable. The Council was losing. Worse, they had no strategy left. That was when analysts noticed something unsettling. On Dominion expansion maps, there was a void. A vast region of space they did not enter. Not fortified. Not contested. Simply avoided. Advance vectors curved away from it. Probes altered course without explanation. Entire fleets diverted as if responding to a threat no one could see. That region bordered the space humanity had once occupied. The realization hit the Council chamber like vacuum exposure. Humanity. A species isolated, sanctioned, and written off as finished. A civilization the Council had pushed into silence and then forgotten. And yet, something about them had caused an empire that devoured stars to hesitate. Reluctantly, desperately, the Council turned to the name they had never planned to speak again. Dormant channels were reactivated. Deprecated frequencies restored. Messages were drafted with extreme care, acknowledging past disagreements, emphasizing shared extinction-level risk, appealing to unity and mutual survival. The first message went unanswered. So did the second. Worlds continued to fall. Finally, stripped of pride and pretense, the Council broadcast a single, unfiltered transmission across every channel humanity had ever used. "We need your help." The reply came minutes later. Not from an ambassador. Not from a politician. From a calm, steady voice identified only as command. "We know," the voice said. "We've been observing." Relief swept the chamber. Counselors spoke at once, offering restored rights, full reintegration, shared authority, anything to secure humanity's aid. The human voice cut through the noise. "You isolated us. You revoked our rights. You expected us to collapse," Command said. "We didn't. What's happening now is not our responsibility." Panic surged. "If the Dominion wins," a counselor pleaded, "humanity will fall as well." There was a pause, long enough to be terrifying. "Yes," Command replied. "Eventually." Hope flared. "So you'll help." "We didn't say that," the voice answered. "We said we understand the threat." Council displays changed. Data flooded the chamber. Dominion logistics, behavioral models, structural weaknesses mapped with disturbing precision. Entire campaigns already simulated. Failure points identified. Casualty projections calculated down to decimals. Humanity hadn't just been watching. They had been preparing. "We will engage the Dominion," Command said at last. "Because extinction-level threats do not respect borders." Relief washed through the Council. "But understand this," the voice continued, colder now. "This is not a rescue. This is containment." The transmission ended. And as Dominion fleets closed in on the heart of the galaxy, the Council finally understood the truth behind humanity's disappearance. They hadn't vanished because they were weak. They had stepped back to prepare for something far worse than the galaxy had ever imagined. The Galactic Council expected forgiveness. They told themselves that desperation excused history, that extinction erased old grievances, that when humanity finally spoke, it would be with anger softened by relief, grateful to be needed again. What they found instead was resolve. The Council chambers filled with frantic voices as human channels reopened across monitored space. Offers poured out, restored rights, permanent Council seats, emergency authority, shared command of all remaining fleets. Concessions that would have been unthinkable only cycles earlier were now given freely. Humanity listened. Then they answered calmly. "We will decide when to act." The words landed with terrifying finality. The Council protested. Time was running out. Every delay meant another system lost, another species enslaved. They demanded timelines, strategies, assurances, anything to anchor their panic. They received none. Rushed decisions built this crisis. The human voice, identified only as command, continued. "We will not repeat that mistake." The transmission ended. Fear spread faster than any invasion. For the first time in recorded galactic history, survival did not depend on ancient laws or political coalitions. It depended on the judgment of a species the Council had once dismissed as weak. And humanity was not in a hurry. Far beyond charted space, something began to move. In regions long marked as empty, where gravity maps blurred and sensor returns dissolved into static, human structures awakened. Massive frameworks that had been dormant since the first days of isolation came online in perfect synchronization. Foundries ignited. Stars were tapped, not consumed, but shaped. Their output redirected into controlled streams of power-feeding constructs wrapped in reinforced spacetime fields. Fleets once scattered and hidden aligned along vectors no Council doctrine recognized. Soon after, space itself began to tremble. Not from hyperspace ruptures. Not from weapons fire. From strain. Sensors across the galaxy screamed as localized distortions synchronized across light years. Reality flexed, pulsed, stabilized, again and again, like a system being tested under load. Humanity was not mobilizing. They were initializing. The Council finally understood the difference. Whatever humanity was preparing was not a desperate response to the Dominion. It was a solution planned long ago, refined in silence, and reserved for threats that justified its use. The Dominion qualified. Whether the Council did, was no longer relevant. Humanity had not returned seeking forgiveness. They had returned to ensure survival. And they would act only when the outcome was already decided. Human fleets emerged in perfect silence. There was no warning, no flare of hyperspace, no surge of detectable energy. One moment, Dominion armadas filled the void, vast, burning formations advancing inexorably toward the inner systems. The next moment, humanity was there. Space folded, not violently, but precisely. Massive human constructs unfolded from nothing, slipping into real space as if they had always belonged there. Fleets aligned instantly, each vessel locking into position with machine-perfect coordination. They were enormous. They were exact. They were unstoppable. Arc ships larger than moons drifted into formation beside lattice-like defense platforms that stretched across entire approach vectors. Foundry fleets anchored the rear, already fabricating replacements that had not yet been lost. Every human ship occupied the one place it needed to be, and nowhere else. They did not advance. They waited. Dominion sensors screamed as targeting solutions failed to resolve. Human ships emitted no recognizable emissions. No signatures matched any known database. It was as if the enemy had appeared outside the rules of reality the Dominion understood. Then a single message crossed every channel. Unencrypted. Untranslated, because translation was unnecessary. Stand down. The Dominion answered with annihilation. They surged forward, sacrificing entire formations to overwhelm the human line. Planet-killer lances fired. Reality-warping weapons detonated. Space burned white as the Dominion unleashed everything it had ever used to break resistance. Human shields flexed and held. Energy dispersed into layered fields and vanished. Momentum died mid-flight. Attacks that had shattered stars simply failed. Human hulls did not retreat. They did not even acknowledge the assault. Then humanity responded. Not with fury. With correction. Zones of space hardened. Dominion ships slowed, then stopped entirely, caught in regions where physics no longer obeyed them. Propulsion failed. Weapons systems shut down. Fleets froze mid-charge like insects trapped in amber. Human counterfire began. It was not a barrage. It was removal. Dominion vessels vanished one by one, erased by localized null events that left no wreckage, no explosion, only absence. Command ships disappeared first. Control nodes second. Every strike eliminated something essential. The Dominion attempted to adapt. They always did. But there was nothing to adapt to. Human tactics did not escalate or shift. They remained constant, as if the outcome had been calculated before the first shot was fired. Retreat vectors collapsed before they could be used. Reinforcements never arrived. The Dominion's vast, interconnected command intelligence, an entity believed to exist across dimensions, went silent without warning. No death cry. No collapse. It simply stopped. The war ended before the enemy understood it had begun. Across the galaxy, Council sensors struggled to process the data. Battles that should have lasted centuries were over in minutes. Systems doomed to fall went quiet, untouched by human occupation. Human fleets did not pursue. They powered down. A final transmission followed, brief and absolute. The threat has been neutralized. Do not pursue remnants. Then the fleets withdrew. Space folded back into emptiness. Physics relaxed. Reality resumed its familiar shape. Human vessels vanished as cleanly as they had arrived, leaving behind only silence and survivors. The Galactic Council sat in stunned disbelief, because they finally understood the truth. Humanity had not fought a war. They had executed a solution, and the galaxy would never again confuse human restraint with weakness. The Galactic Council tried to reclaim control. In the wake of the Dominion's sudden erasure, emergency edicts poured from the chambers. Borders were reaffirmed. Authority reasserted. Committees formed to oversee reconstruction, security, and future existential threats. The Council spoke as though order had been restored by its wisdom, as though the catastrophe had been merely a test they had endured. No one believed them. It was too late. Across the galaxy, memory was still raw. Entire species remembered how the Council had argued while their skies burned, how votes had been delayed while worlds fell silent, and how, when the end seemed inevitable, salvation had not come from ancient authority, but from a civilization long dismissed as finished. The Council still had fleets. They still had laws. They still had chambers filled with echoes of power. But their influence had changed. Humanity did not step forward to take control. They refused every offer. Permanent council seats. Supreme military command. Emergency governance over liberated systems. Each proposal was met with the same calm response. "We are not interested in ruling," command transmitted. "Rulership creates dependence. Dependence creates collapse." Instead, humanity shared knowledge. Stabilization technologies. Planetary repair frameworks. Defensive architectures designed not for dominance, but for endurance. They helped rebuild, then withdrew, leaving systems stronger, more resilient, and entirely autonomous. Humanity did not replace the Council. They made it optional. Species across the galaxy began to change their doctrines. Defense replaced prestige. Redundancy replaced elegance. Survival planning replaced blind trust in distant authority. Humanity's greatest legacy was not victory, but perspective. And then, quietly, they faded back into the dark. Not hidden. Not isolated. Prepared. Human space remained distant, undefined, its borders unmarked. Their fleets were not stationed at trade hubs or core worlds. They waited beyond mapped space, where sensors strained and certainty failed. Watching. Listening. Enduring. The Council never sanctioned humanity again. They never dared. Because the galaxy now understood a truth that could not be unlearned. Humanity did not need to rule to matter. They did not need permission to protect existence. They did not need gratitude to act. They had survived abandonment. They had faced annihilation. They had ended a war without becoming what they fought. And that changed everything. So when the stars finally grew quiet, and history recorded the Dominion as a footnote rather than a destiny, one certainty remained, spoken softly across worlds and etched into every serious strategic archive. If darkness rises again, if something ancient, merciless, or unimaginable threatens the galaxy, humanity will be there. Not as rulers, not as conquerors, but as the ones who endured long enough to stop it.